The day Eliza Calloway arrived in Dustfield, Texas, she arrived with nothing but a bruise along her jaw, a carpetbag with a broken latch, and a last name that no longer belonged to her. It was the autumn of 1878, and the plains of West Texas stretched out in every direction like a vast and indifferent God, golden and burning and unmoved by the troubles of small people. The town of Dustfield sat at the edge of the Llano Estacado, a cluster of sun-bleached buildings clinging to the earth as though afraid the wind might carry them away entirely. The church steeple was the tallest thing for 40 miles, and the general store doubled as the post office, and, on certain evenings, a makeshift courthouse when the circuit judge rode through. Eliza had come on the stagecoach from San Angelo, and she had not slept in 3 days. She sat in the dust outside the stage depot with her carpetbag on her knees and watched the town go about its business. A man in a leather apron was hammering something at the blacksmith's forge. 2 women in calico dresses crossed the main street without looking at her. A dog lay in the shadow of the water trough, its ribs moving slowly in the heat. She had nowhere to go. This was not a metaphor. She had arrived in Dustfield because the stagecoach driver had told her it was the last stop before the line turned east again. And east was where she had come from, and east was something she could not do. She had 15 cents in her coat pocket, a half-eaten biscuit wrapped in a handkerchief, and the very recent knowledge that the man she had called her husband for 2 years had never filed the marriage certificate with the county and had, in the same afternoon she discovered this, informed her he had a legal wife in Dallas and that Eliza ought to find somewhere else to be. She was 22 years old and she was nobody. Not a widow, not a wife. Not a daughter since her father had died of fever 2 winters past and her mother before that. She was a woman with no name that the law would recognize, no kin, no claim to anything at all. She was sitting in this particular state of quiet devastation when the shadow fell over her. "You look like you're trying to decide something," said the voice attached to the shadow. She looked up. The man was tall, which she noticed first, and lean in the way that long days of hard work made men lean rather than the way hunger did. He wore a battered hat the color of old saddle leather, pushed back on his head so that she could see his face clearly. He was perhaps 30, maybe a year or 2 past it, with a jaw that needed shaving and dark circles under his eyes that had nothing to do with the current afternoon. His eyes were gray, the particular gray of storm clouds when they are heavy with rain but have not yet decided to fall. He was looking at her with an expression that was not pity exactly, but was something adjacent to it, something that recognized trouble. "I am not deciding anything," Eliza said, because it was the most honest answer. "I have nothing to decide between." He absorbed this. He did not look away or excuse himself or offer some cheerful nonsense. He simply crouched down so that he was at her level, resting his forearms on his knees, and he looked at her carpetbag with its broken latch and then back at her face. "You just come in on the stage?" "Yes." "You got people here?" "No." "You got somewhere to be tonight?" She looked at him steadily. "If I did, I would be there." He nodded slowly, as though she had confirmed something he already suspected. He was quiet for a moment, and she noticed that the quiet did not seem to bother him. He wore it the way some men wore their hats, easily, habitually, without thinking about it. "My name is Cole Whitfield," he said. "I run the Whitfield Ranch, 6 miles north. My wife passed 14 months ago. I have a foreman named Augusto and 2 ranch hands and nobody to run the house." He paused. "I'm not saying that to be forward. I'm saying it so the offer makes sense." She waited. "There is a room off the kitchen that was my wife's sewing room," he said. "It's small, but it's private. You could stay there, help with cooking and keeping the house, and I'd pay you $6 a month and you're bored. That's honest work and I'm an honest man, and you can ask anybody in this town if that's true." Eliza studied him. She had learned in the past 2 years of her life that men who were dishonest usually worked very hard to look trustworthy, and that the performance of trustworthiness had a particular quality to it, a kind of smoothness. This man did not look smooth. He looked tired and direct and like a person who had forgotten, somewhere in the past 14 months, how to want anything at all. "I will ask," she said. She went into the general store, where a woman named Mrs. Pearl Hutchins presided over a counter full of penny candy and dried goods with the authority of a small queen. Eliza asked about Cole Whitfield, and Mrs. Hutchins's expression shifted into something between sympathy and respect. "Cole Whitfield is the most decent man in this county," Mrs. Hutchins said. "Lost his wife, Margaret, last year to childbed fever. He has not been the same since, but he has never been anything but honorable. If he offered you work, he means it exactly as he said it." Eliza thanked her and went back outside. "I will take the position," she said. Cole Whitfield nodded, picked up her carpetbag without being asked, and led her to his horse, where a small wagon was hitched. He helped her up onto the seat without ceremony and climbed up beside her and clicked at the horse, and they rode out of Dustfield in the long golden light of late afternoon, without knowing that by the time they returned to that town, everything would be different. The ranch was not what she had expected, though she was not certain what she had expected. It was a working ranch, which meant it was practical rather than pretty, but it was well maintained in a way that suggested pride without ostentation. The main house was a long, low structure of whitewashed adobe, with a covered porch that ran the length of the front. There was a well with a good rope and pulley, a vegetable garden that had gone somewhat wild without tending, and a barn that smelled of horses and hay. Augusto, the foreman, was a Mexican man of about 50 with a face like carved mahogany and a manner that was dignified to the point of formality. He tipped his hat to her when Cole introduced them and said, "Welcome, miss," in a way that made her feel briefly and unexpectedly like she was a person of some account. The two ranch hands, brothers named Silas and Decker Prout, were younger and less formal, but they were polite enough, and they cleared out of the kitchen when she went to inspect it as though they understood instinctively that the kitchen was now her domain. Cole showed her the sewing room. It had a narrow bed with a quilt, a small window that looked out toward the eastern hills, and a chest of drawers. There was still a small wicker basket in the corner with sewing thread in it, and this detail, this evidence of a woman who had lived here and done ordinary things, made Eliza stop in the doorway for a moment. "I can move those things if you'd like," Cole said from behind her. "No," she said. "Leave them." She did not explain herself, and he did not press her. She slept that first night in a bed that was not hers, in a house that was not hers, with the Texas wind moving across the plains outside and making the window frame rattle softly, and she thought that this was perhaps the strangest and most precarious position she had ever been in, which was saying something given the year she had just endured. But she also thought, before she fell into the first deep sleep she'd had in weeks, that she felt safer here than she had felt in a very long time. The weeks settled into a rhythm that was unfamiliar to her in its simplicity but not unpleasant. She rose before dawn, built up the kitchen fire, and made breakfast for the men before they went out to the day's work. There was always bread to bake and always something to mend and always more work than hours, and she found that she was grateful for this, because work left little room for the kind of thinking that had been eating at her on the stagecoach. She restored the vegetable garden in stages, pulling the dead growth first and replanting what she could. She found that Cole kept an excellent root cellar, and that Augusto's wife, Catalina, who lived in a small house on the property's edge with their 3 children, knew more about preserving food and growing things in the dry Texas soil than anyone Eliza had ever met. They became friendly in the careful way of women who communicate first through the practical, through the exchange of recipes and the observation of each other's competence. Cole himself she saw mostly at meals. He was quiet at the table, not rudely so but deeply so, the way a man is quiet when his thoughts have turned inward and not all of them are willing to come back out. He thanked her for meals with genuine sincerity and always carried his own plate to the wash basin and never left his boots in the main room. These things told her more about him than conversation would have. She noticed things. She noticed that he went out to the north pasture alone on Sunday evenings when the work was done, and that he was always gone for about an hour, and that he always came back looking older than when he had left. She noticed that there was a photograph on the mantelpiece of a young woman with light hair and a direct gaze, and that Cole never looked at it when other people were in the room, but that once she came into the parlor unexpectedly and found him standing before it with his hat in his hands. She pretended not to have seen it. She backed out quietly and knocked on the doorframe before entering again. She noticed that he slept poorly. The ranch house walls were not thick, and sometimes very late she could hear him moving in the room at the far end of the hall, the creak of floorboards, the sound of a chair being pulled back. She imagined him sitting at the table in his room in the dark, and the image was so lonely that it made her chest ache. It was Catalina who told her the full story, on a warm November afternoon when they were together in the kitchen, putting up the last of the summer's dried chilies. Margaret was a good woman, Catalina said, her dark eyes careful and steady. Very good. Cole, he loved her the way some men love, like it was the whole of him. And then the baby came early and nothing went right, and by the next morning both of them were gone. Eliza was quiet, threading chilies onto string. The baby too. Catalina was quiet for a moment. It was a son. Cole, he had planted a cottonwood for the baby. When everything went wrong, he planted another one beside it, smaller, for Margaret. Those are the two trees in the north pasture that are not quite the same as the others. Eliza understood now why he went there on Sunday evenings. He has been very alone, Catalina continued. Too alone. It is not good for a man to be so alone in his grief, because grief will expand to fill all the space you give it. Eliza thought about this for a long time after Catalina went home. She did not try to fix Cole Whitfield. She had not arrived here in any position to be fixing anyone, and she had enough sense to know that grief was not a thing you fixed from the outside. But she began to be more present in the evenings, simply by making the parlor a comfortable place to sit. She put a lamp on the side table and found a cribbage board in the back of a cupboard and asked, one evening after supper, whether he knew the game. He looked at her with an expression she had not seen on him before, a brief flicker of something surprised. "I know it," he said. "Would you like to play?" Another pause. Then he pulled out a chair. "All right." They played for an hour that first evening without much conversation, which was fine. The game itself was conversation enough. She was good at cribbage and so was he, and there was a satisfaction in a well-matched game that needed no commentary. When they finished, he counted the score and she had won by 4 points, and he looked at her with the faintest possible curve at one corner of his mouth. "Where did you learn to play?" he asked. "My father," she said. He was a great proponent of cribbage and a very poor loser. The curve at the corner of his mouth deepened by a fraction. It was not quite a smile, but it was the outline of where a smile might one day be, and she thought it was one of the more unexpected things she had seen since arriving in Dustfield. They played cribbage several evenings after that, and then on a night when the first real cold of December came rolling in off the plains and the wind was making the chimney moan, he brought out a chessboard instead, and they sat for 2 hours without keeping score, simply playing through, talking occasionally about the moves, and it was the most peaceful Eliza had felt since before everything had gone wrong with Thomas Garrett in San Angelo. She had not thought about Thomas very much since arriving at the ranch, which surprised her when she noticed it. She had spent the first several weeks of her time in Dustfield expecting the grief and the humiliation of what he had done to her to rise up and swamp her, but the work kept her too busy during the days, and the evenings were too calm and too real to leave much room for it. What Thomas had done to her was not grief in the traditional sense. It was something colder. She had believed she was a wife, and she was not. She had believed she had a home, and she did not. She had believed she was a woman of some standing in the community of San Angelo, and then in a single afternoon she had learned that she was, in the eyes of the law and of the respectable world, nothing of the kind. She had no legal name, no legal status. The name she had been using, Calloway, was her maiden name, her father's name. But her father was dead, and she had no brothers, and there was nobody left to whom that name was an anchor. She was a woman without a name that meant anything, and in 1878, in West Texas, that was not a small thing. It was the kind of thing that could determine the entire quality of the rest of your life. December moved into January, and January was cold and bright and relentless, and the ranch work shifted but never stopped. Cole and Augusto and the Prout brothers spent long days mending fences and moving the cattle to the south pasture where there was better wind shelter. And Eliza kept the house warm and the larder stocked and learned more about the rhythms of a cattle ranch than she had ever expected to know. She also, quietly and without ceremony, made a friend of Silas Prout's young wife, Ada, who came out to the ranch twice a week to help with the laundry. Ada was 20 years old and had a daughter of 18 months named Ruth, who toddled around the kitchen getting into things. And watching Ada with Ruth made something in Eliza's chest do a complicated thing that she did not entirely examine. It was Ada who first said what everyone else had apparently been thinking. They were at the washboard together in early February, and the steam was rising off the water, and little Ruth was sitting in a wash basket, and Ada said, without any particular build-up, "You know folks in town are talking." Eliza wrung out a shirt. "About what?" "About you and Cole, about you living out here and not being married to him." Eliza stopped wringing. "It's not my intention to be a source of gossip," she said carefully. "I know it isn't," Ada said in the tone of a woman who genuinely means it. "And it's not fair. You're working here, just working, same as Augusto and Silas and Decker work here. But a woman living in a man's house without being his wife is something people will talk about whether it's fair or not." Eliza looked out the small window at the winter sky. "What are they saying?" "Nothing too terrible yet," Ada said. "But if it goes on long enough, they will." She paused. "Mrs. Hutchins has been defending you at the church socials, but even she said she worries for your reputation." Eliza went back to the laundry. She wrung the shirt out and hung it over the line and thought about the word reputation and what it meant for a woman who was already operating without a legal name. She thought about the fact that her situation was already precarious enough, and that if the town of Dustfield turned against her, she would have nowhere to go that she could think of. She was still thinking about it 2 days later when Cole came in from the cold at midday and found her at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee going cold in her hands and a look on her face that he apparently could read well enough to know was not ordinary. "Something wrong?" he asked, coming to the fire to warm his hands. She had been going back and forth about whether to bring it up. She had decided she would not. And then she looked at him standing at the fireplace and thought about Ada's warning and decided that not saying it was a kind of dishonesty she did not have room for. "Ada tells me there is talk in town," she said, "about my living here without being married to you." He was quiet for a long moment, looking into the fire. "I had heard that too," he said, "from Augusto." Eliza wrapped her hands around her cold cup. "I want you to know that I understand if that creates a problem. I could try to find a position in town. Mrs. Hutchins mentioned the school might need someone too." "I'm not sending you to town," he said. The directness of it surprised her. He turned from the fire and looked at her, and his expression was not the distant, half-present look he sometimes wore. It was fully present and decided. "You've done more for this house in 3 months than I have in a year," he said. "You've done more for this place than I have in a year. I'm not sending you away because some people in town have too much time on their hands. But the talk will grow," she said. "And it will affect you as well as me. Your standing in this county matters for the ranch, for business." He looked at her for a moment that stretched. "There is one solution to the talk," he said. Then he stopped, as though considering whether he ought to continue. She waited. "I'm not saying it to be forward," he said, and she recognized the exact phrase from the afternoon on the steps of the stage depot, and something about that repetition made her feel that he was a man who had thought about it carefully. "And I am not saying it because of the ranch or my standing. I am saying it because you are in a situation that is not fair and that I can help correct if you are willing." She understood what he was saying. "You would give me your name," she said. "I would give you my name," he confirmed. "And a legal document that is what a legal document should be. No pretending. A real marriage on paper that protects you." He paused. "I know it is not what you might have imagined for yourself." Eliza thought about what she might have imagined for herself at some earlier, more innocent point in time, and she thought about Thomas Garrett and his smooth performance of trustworthiness, and she thought about being nobody with no name in West Texas in the winter of 1879. "I would not want you to feel obligated," she said. "I feel it is the right thing," he said. "That is not the same as obligation." She was quiet for a long moment. The fire popped and settled. "There is something you should know," she said, "about why I have no name at present." He waited, and he waited without the quality of judgment about him that she had come to dread in other people. She told him about Thomas Garrett, briefly and plainly, without embellishment or self-pity. She told him about the 2 years in San Angelo, and the marriage certificate that had never been filed and the wife in Dallas she had not known existed. She told him about the afternoon she had been informed of all of this, and the stagecoach, and the 15 cents, and the half-eaten biscuit in her coat pocket. When she was done, he was quiet for several seconds. "He is a coward and a liar," Cole said then, with a simplicity and a certainty that was almost startling. "And what he did to you was wrong. None of it belongs to you." Eliza looked at her coffee cup. "I know that," she said. "I know it up here." She touched her temple. "It has taken a little longer here." She touched the center of her chest. He nodded. He understood about things taking longer in the chest than in the head. She could see that he understood it precisely. "Will you think about the offer?" he said. "I will," she said. She thought about it for 3 days. She was not prolonging it out of indecision, but out of a determination to be certain of her own mind, because she had made a decision once based on what she wanted to be true rather than what was true, and she would not do that again. So she examined this situation with care. She thought about Cole Whitfield and what she knew of him after 3 months. She thought about his quiet and his grief and his cribbage game, and the way he carried his own plate to the wash basin, and the way he had stood in front of Margaret's photograph with his hat in his hands. She thought about the 2 cottonwood trees in the north pasture. She thought about the fact that she did not mistake his offer for romance, and that he had not offered it as romance. It was something else, something older and more serious and perhaps more honest than romance. He had seen her trouble and he had the means to address it, and he was willing to do so. She went to him on the evening of the 3rd day when he was on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the last of the light go out of the western sky. "Yes," she said. He looked at her. "I will marry you," she said, "if the offer still stands." "It stands," he said. They were married 10 days later at the Dustfield church on a Wednesday morning in February of 1879, with Reverend Aldous Kane presiding, and Augusto and Catalina as witnesses, and Ada holding little Ruth in the back pew. Mrs. Pearl Hutchins was there, and wept briefly into her handkerchief, which seemed to be her standard response to any significant occasion. Eliza wore her best dress, which was a dark blue wool that she had pressed carefully the night before, and she carried a small bunch of dried lavender that Catalina had pressed into her hands that morning. Cole wore his good coat and had shaved very carefully, and when Reverend Kane led them through the words, Cole said them in a clear, steady voice that did not waver. When it was done and the certificate was signed, Cole folded it carefully and put it inside his coat, and Eliza thought that the feeling moving through her was not what she had expected. She had expected to feel relieved, and she did feel relieved, but she also felt something more complicated, something that she could not immediately name. They drove back to the ranch in the wagon, and the February sky was very blue and very cold, and there were hawks circling over the south pasture, and Cole said about halfway home, "I thought we might celebrate with Augusto and his family tonight. Catalina mentioned she was going to cook." "That sounds very nice," Eliza said. It was very nice. Catalina cooked an extraordinary amount of food, and her children ran around the main house making more noise than the space had held in a long time. and Silas and Decker Prout came in from the bunkhouse, and everybody ate and drank Augusto's homemade wine, which was surprisingly good. And at some point in the evening, Cole laughed at something one of the Prout boys said, and it was the first time Eliza had heard him laugh. And it was a good laugh, a real one. And it made her look at him sideways with something unfamiliar moving in her chest. She was Mrs. Cole Whitfield now. She was a woman with a name and a legal document and a chair at a table, and a small room off the kitchen that was beginning to feel, cautiously, like her own. Spring came to West Texas in its usual fashion, which was to say with a great deal of argument from the weather before it finally arrived. March was still cold and sometimes cruel, but April softened things considerably, and by May the plains were doing what they occasionally did when the rains came right, which was to bloom in a way that seemed almost implausible given the arid discipline of the rest of the year. Eliza expanded the vegetable garden significantly in April with Catalina's guidance and planted a long row of sunflowers along the south side of the house for no practical reason except that she wanted them there. Cole, when he saw the seedlings going in, stopped and looked at them. "Those are not vegetables," he said. "No," she agreed. He considered this. "Good," he said, and went on to the barn. She was replanting the sunflower row when the trouble came. It arrived in the form of a man named Harlan Goss, who had been buying up land west of Dustfield for 2 years, and who had set his particular appetite on the eastern edge of the Whitfield ranch, which bordered his holdings, and through which ran the best seasonal creek in the county. Harlan Goss was not an evil man precisely, but he was the kind of man who had decided early in life that what he wanted was the same thing as what was right, and this made him very difficult to deal with. He came to the ranch on a Thursday afternoon in May with 2 men who worked for him, and a land survey that he claimed had found an irregularity in the original Whitfield deed. Eliza was on the porch when they rode up, and she saw Cole come out from the barn to meet them with the particular stillness he had when something was wrong. She stayed on the porch and she listened, because it was her ranch now too, in the sense that her name was attached to it, and her daily work sustained it, and she had a right to know what threatened it. Goss laid out his argument, which was that the creek boundary had been incorrectly surveyed in 1868 when the original deed was filed, and that his own survey, conducted by a man named Beaumont from Abilene, showed that the creek and the 40 acres along it actually fell within the Goss property line. Cole listened with his arms crossed and his face doing nothing in particular. "I filed that deed in 1868 with the Callahan County Recorder," he said when Goss was finished. "It was surveyed by the county surveyor at the time, a man named Ellard, whose work has never been disputed in this county." "Ellard's dead," Goss said, "and Beaumont's survey supersedes his. I have filed the claim with the county." "I will get my own survey done," Cole said. Goss smiled the smile of a man who believes the outcome is already settled. "You can do that. But in the meantime, you'll want to consider whether the legal costs and the time are worth it for 40 acres of creek bottom." "It is worth it," Cole said simply. When Goss and his men had ridden off, Cole stood in the yard for a moment with his hat pushed back on his head, and then he came up onto the porch and sat down heavily in the other chair and was quiet. "He filed it with the county recorder," Eliza said. "Yes. Then you need a lawyer and a counter-survey," she said, "and you need them before the county has a chance to act on Goss's claim." He looked at her. "I know. I can write the letter to the surveyor if you tell me who to contact in Abilene," she said. "And I believe there is a land attorney in San Angelo who has a good reputation, a man named Forrester." He looked at her with that particular expression she had begun to recognize, the one that had some surprise in it. "You know Forrester?" "I know of him," she said. "Thomas Garrett had cause to use him once and spoke well of his work." She paused. "It is the most useful thing Thomas ever contributed to my life, knowing of Forrester." Cole almost smiled. "Write the letters," he said. She wrote the letters that evening at the kitchen table with the lamp burning low, and she felt while she was writing them a particular kind of usefulness that was satisfying in a way she had not expected. She was good at writing. She had always been good at it, had spent more time with books than most women of her acquaintance in San Angelo, had a clarity of expression that came naturally to her, and she put all of it into those letters. Forrester replied within a week. The counter-survey was arranged for the following month. The dispute with Goss would take time, but it would be properly contested, and Eliza followed each development with close attention and discussed it with Cole in the evenings with a directness that he matched. This was how they learned to talk to each other. Not through careful sentiment, but through the practical, through the working out of real problems, through the mutual application of their different kinds of intelligence to the same set of challenges. He knew the land and the cattle and the operations of the ranch in a way that she could never fully match, but she had a precision with words and with record-keeping, and with the external machinery of the legal and commercial world that he had never much cared to cultivate, and that he was now grateful to have available. By June they were talking through supper rather than sitting in silence, and the conversations had begun to extend past the practical into other territory, into remembered things and opinions about things and the occasional joke. And these extensions were the most interesting part of any day for Eliza, because she was discovering, incrementally and with some wonder, that Cole Whitfield was an unexpectedly interesting person. He had opinions about books, which surprised her. He had read more than she would have guessed for a man who had spent his life working land, mostly because his mother had been a great reader and had made books a priority in a household that had little else to spare. He had thoughts about the territory question, about whether Texas had made the right decisions in the years following the war, about the way the cattle industry was changing as the railheads moved and the market shifted. He had a dry and quiet humor that appeared unexpectedly and then disappeared again before you could quite examine it. And he was kind. He was kind in the particular way that is not performance, not the ostentatious generosity of a man who wants to be seen giving, but the steady, matter-of-fact kindness of a person who simply considers other people's circumstances as a natural part of his thinking. He was this way with his cattle and with his horses and with his men, and as the months had gone on he had become this way with her too, in ways she did not always register immediately but that accumulated. She registered them now, in June, with the sunflowers beginning to open along the south wall and the cribbage board on the table and the counter-survey scheduled, and everything in her life more ordered and more real than it had been in the entire previous year. She was starting to realize that she was looking forward to seeing him every morning. This realization arrived not as a revelation, but as a quiet fact, the way you might notice that summer has actually arrived not on a particular dramatic day, but in the middle of an ordinary afternoon when you are suddenly aware that the air has been warm for some time. She looked forward to seeing him in the morning, and she looked forward to the evenings, and she had started to notice, with a kind of involuntary attention, the particular way he moved, and the particular way he held a cup of coffee, and the way his eyes changed when something amused him, and the way his voice went even quieter when he was talking about something he cared about. She did not do anything with this realization because she did not know what to do with it, and because the situation was complicated, and because she had very recently made a significant error in judgment about a man and was not eager to make another one. But she started to pay attention to what she felt, because she was a person who believed that feelings, even inconvenient ones, deserved honesty. The counter-survey came back in July, and it confirmed the original Whitfield deed in every particular. Forrester filed the findings with the county, and the Goss claim was rejected. Harlan Goss protested for several weeks and then accepted the outcome with poor grace and retreated to his side of the boundary. Cole came home from Dustfield. The day, the news arrived with a different quality about him, something lighter, and he came into the kitchen where Eliza was canning tomatoes and told her, and she set down the jar she was holding and said good with a feeling that was completely genuine. He stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at her. "You wrote good letters," he said. "You have a good case," she said. "We have a good case," he said, and the plural was small, but she felt it. Later that evening, after supper, they were sitting on the porch in the last of the July warmth, and the sky was doing the thing it did on clear summer evenings in West Texas, turning colors that seemed like something only an artist would attempt and getting away with it. Eliza had a glass of lemonade and Cole had coffee, and they were sitting close enough that she was aware of the warmth of him on her left side. "I want to tell you something," Cole said. She waited. "When you came to me in February with yes," he said, "I was grateful, not for what it solved. I was grateful because," he stopped, and when he started again his voice was careful, as though he was working out the words in real time. "This house had been very empty for a long time, not just without company. It was empty inside of me, the way a house is empty when nobody's home in it. And you came in and you brought something with you. You brought the feeling of someone being home." Eliza held her lemonade and did not look at him. "I know that is not the arrangement we made," he said. "And I am not changing the arrangement without your say. I wanted you to know." She looked at him then. He was looking out at the sunset, not at her, which made it easier to look at him, to look at his profile and his tired, honest face and his gray eyes that had some of the storm out of them now, that were lighter than they had been in February. "I have been trying to understand what I am feeling," she said slowly. "And I am not someone who speaks before I understand, so I have been quiet about it. But I think," she stopped and started again. "I think that I came here with nothing, and that this has become something, and that you are a large part of what has made it something. And I think the feeling I have when I see you in the morning is not the feeling you have about an employer." He turned and looked at her. "No," she said quietly, "it is not." The silence between them was very full. "Eliza," he said, and the way he said her name was different from the way he had said it before. It was the same word, her name, but it had more weight to it, more intention. "Yes," she said. "May I?" He stopped. He tried again. "Would it be all right if I?" "Cole," she said gently. "Yes, you may." He leaned forward and he kissed her, and it was careful and quiet and very serious. The kiss of a man who meant it completely and was also aware that it mattered completely. And she kissed him back with the same weight and the same intention. And when they separated, the sky had gone from orange to purple and the first stars were beginning. "Well," he said after a moment. "Indeed," she said. And then, unexpectedly and simultaneously, they both laughed. And the laughter on the porch of the Whitfield ranch went out into the July evening like something that had been waiting a long time to be released. After that evening things were different between them in ways that were sometimes very obvious and sometimes very subtle. He brought her wildflowers once from the north pasture, a rough bunch gathered carelessly and entirely without sophistication, and she put them in a jar of water on the kitchen window where they could be seen from both inside and outside. He began to sit closer to her in the evenings. She began to let herself rest her head against his shoulder when she was tired, which turned out to be something he seemed to welcome with a profound and uncomplicated pleasure. He was not a man of elaborate romantic gestures, and she did not want elaborate romantic gestures. What she wanted was what she was getting, which was the company of a person who was genuinely interested in her as a person, and who listened when she spoke, and who looked at her sometimes with an expression that made her feel, after a year of feeling like nobody, that she was somebody specific and important. She had been thinking about Margaret. About whether she was in Margaret's place, whether she was filling a space that had been formed by a person who was not her, whether what Cole felt for her was a kind of displacement rather than a genuine feeling directed at her specifically. She had been honest with herself about this concern. One evening in August she raised it. They were walking along the fence line of the east pasture after supper, which had become something they did when the evenings were fair, and she said, "I want to ask you something and I want you to answer me honestly." "I always answer you honestly," he said. "I know. That is why I'm asking." She looked out at the grass moving in the warm wind. "Do you think that what you feel for me is about me specifically? Or is it about the fact that the house needed someone and I was the person who was there? He was quiet for long enough that she knew he was actually thinking about it rather than rushing to reassure her. There is no way to completely separate those things, he said finally. The situation created the proximity, but the proximity showed me you and you are not like anyone else, and what I feel is for you. Not for the house or the space or the idea of a companion. For you, Eliza, for the person you actually are. She thought about this. How do you know the difference? She asked. He looked at her. Because I know what it feels like to love someone in general, someone who is part of your life and part of your days. I felt that for Margaret, and it was real and good, and I will not diminish it. But I also know what it feels like to be interested in a specific person, to want to know how they think and what they believe and what makes them laugh, to want to hear their opinion about a land dispute or a piece of writing or the color of a Sunday evening sky. That second thing is what I feel for you. Eliza walked for a few steps. That is a good answer, she said. It is an honest one, he said. She reached over and took his hand as they walked, which was the first time she had initiated the contact, and he closed his hand around hers immediately and without hesitation, and they walked the fence line in the August warmth with the evening coming on around them, and she felt, moving through her like clean water, something she had not felt in a very long time. She felt loved. Not the performance of it, not the shape of it without the substance, but the real article, specific and quiet and sure. September brought the beginning of the fall cattle drive preparation, which meant the ranch was busier than at any other time of year, and Cole was on horseback from before dawn to after dusk most days, and Eliza kept the ranch house running with the efficiency of a well-organized military campaign. She kept everyone fed and the accounts in order and the correspondence with the buyers in Fort Worth current. And she did all of this while also noticing, with a private and quiet pleasure, that every evening, no matter how late or how tired Cole was, he came to find her before he slept. Sometimes he just sat with her for 15 minutes, too tired to talk, drinking the last cup of coffee from the pot she kept warm. But he came, every evening, as though she were something he needed to check in with, something that oriented him. She had begun to understand that she was also orienting herself by him. By the sound of his boots on the porch, by the particular way he said her name, by the quality of his presence in a room, which had a solidity and a realness that she had been unconsciously leaning toward for months. She also, in September, allowed herself to think about the future in a way she had not permitted since arriving in Dustfield. She thought about next year and the year after and the years after that, and these thoughts had a specific shape to them now, a shape that included this ranch and this land and this man, and thinking them did not frighten her the way thinking about the future had frightened her on the stagecoach from San Angelo. She thought about children. She thought about this carefully, and with the knowledge that it was complicated, because she knew Cole had lost a son and lost Margaret in the same terrible night, and she did not know what he carried about that or what the idea of children was to him now. She brought it up on a quiet Sunday afternoon in October, one of those brilliant fall days when the Texas sky is so blue it seems almost aggressive about it, when they were sitting on the porch and everything was still. "I want to talk about something," she said. "All right." "Children," she said, and she watched his face. It did not close, which she had been afraid it might. It did something more complicated, something that moved through several registers before settling. "What about them?" he said carefully. "I want them," she said, "someday, not immediately. But I want you to know that I want them, because if you feel you cannot, if after what happened it is something you cannot consider, I would rather know it now than not know it." He was quiet for a long time. She let the quiet stand. "I have been afraid of it," he said finally. "Not of the children themselves, but of how it went before, of the way it ended. I have been afraid that wanting it again is inviting that outcome again." "That is understandable," she said. "But I know," he said slowly, "that fear is not a good reason to refuse a thing. That refusing something good because something good went wrong once before it's letting the grief win past where it should." He looked at her. "I want children," he said. "I have wanted them since before any of this. I want them with you, Eliza. I am afraid, but I want it anyway." She took his hand. "Then we will want it together," she said. "And if we are afraid, we can be afraid together." He squeezed her hand so hard it almost hurt, and she let him because she understood what the pressure of it meant. October turned into November and November into December, and the seasons on the Whitfield ranch became something Eliza felt in her bones now, the way a person feels the seasons of a place they have lived in long enough to belong to. She was beginning to belong here. Not in the tenuous way of a person who has found temporary shelter, but in the deeper and more permanent way of a person whose life has put down roots into a specific piece of earth. She walked the fence lines now without needing to think about where she was. She knew the names of all 12 horses by their markings and temperaments. She knew which sections of the creek ran fastest in spring, and where the best stand of timber was for shade in summer, and where you could see the farthest, looking out to the west on a clear afternoon. She was home. She had not been home in a very long time, and she had not expected it to come to her in quite this form, but here it was, unmistakable and solid beneath her feet. Cole took her to the north pasture on a Sunday evening in November, which he had never done before. He had always gone alone. She understood the significance of this without needing to be told. The two cottonwood trees stood side by side in the grass, the older one taller now, the younger one still smaller but established, its roots deep enough now that it would grow for many decades. In November they had lost their leaves and stood bare against the blue-gray evening sky, and they were very beautiful in a spare and honest way. Cole stood beside her and looked at the trees for a long time. Her name was Margaret Ellen Whitfield, he said quietly. She was 26 years old, and she was brave, and she was kind, and she made terrible biscuits, which I never told her, and she loved this land the way you love it. He paused. The boy would have been named Thomas, after her father. Eliza stood beside him and listened. "I could not come out here for a long time," he said. "And then I could come, but I could not be here without being lost in it. And then—" he stopped. "And then something changed, and I could come out here and I could feel sad about what was lost without feeling like I was going to drown in it. That something changing was you." She did not say anything because she did not think anything needed to be said. She reached over and took his hand, and they stood together in front of the two bare trees in the November evening and said nothing further, and the saying nothing was a kind of conversation too. On the way back to the house, halfway across the north pasture, he stopped walking and turned to face her. "I love you," he said. "I want you to know that I know the difference between gratitude and love, and I know what I feel for you is love. I am not a man who says things he does not mean." She looked at his face in the fading light, this face she had been learning for nearly a year now, this face she had come to find more beautiful than she could have explained to anyone who had not spent time in its presence. "I know you are not," she said. "Eliza." "I love you, Cole," she said. "Truly and specifically, I love who you are." He kissed her in the north pasture, with the last light dying in the west and the two bare cottonwood trees behind them. And it was the sort of kiss that she thought she would remember for the rest of her life, not because it was elaborate, but because it was entirely true. The winter of 1879 into 1880 was long and cold, and they spent it close to the fire and close to each other. And there was a sweetness to those dark months that surprised Eliza, because she had not expected the cold and the confinement to be sweet. But they were. The long evenings were full of books and chess and conversation that ranged across everything and nothing, and there was a physical warmth between them now as well, the easy and comfortable warmth of two people who have grown into the habit of each other, and she found that she was deeply contented in a way that was new to her in its quietness. She had been happy before, in moments, in flashes. This was different. This was a sustained and daily and weather-resistant thing. She discovered she was expecting a baby in late February of 1880. She did not tell Cole immediately, not because she was afraid, but because she wanted to be certain first, and because she wanted a few days to sit with the knowledge alone, to feel it completely before she shared it. She spent 3 days carrying it privately, going about her work with this extraordinary secret, and she was so aware of her own body during those days, so attentive to every small sensation, that she felt she was living at a heightened frequency. She told him on a Thursday evening after supper. She waited until the table was cleared and the kitchen was quiet, and then she sat down across from him and said, "I have something to tell you." He looked at her face and something shifted in his immediately, some animal readiness. She told him. The silence lasted only a second. Then he got up from his chair very quickly and came around the table and took her face in both hands, and she could feel that his hands were shaking slightly, and he looked at her with an expression that was the most unguarded she had ever seen on him, something raw and huge moving through it. "Are you certain?" he said. "Fairly certain," she said. "We should have the doctor out to confirm." "Yes," he said. "Yes, we will do that." He was still holding her face. "Eliza." "I know," she said. Are you all right? How do you feel? Have you been?" "I feel well," she said. "I have been tired, but I feel well." He kissed her forehead, then her cheek, then her forehead again, and she could feel the tremendous care in it, the attempt to contain what he was feeling and redirect it into something gentle enough for the moment. "We will take very good care," he said. "Everything that can be done, we will do it." "I know," she said. The doctor, a steady and competent man named Wharton who rode a circuit through that part of the county, confirmed the pregnancy in March. He was encouraging and practical, and gave Eliza sensible advice about her health and what to expect. He also spoke quietly and separately with Cole about the concerns Cole had about childbed complications, and whatever Wharton said to him seemed to help, because Cole came away from that conversation with less of the barely contained fear in him, and more of a grounded determination to simply be careful and present. He was extraordinary through the pregnancy. He was not overly solicitous, which she would have found stifling, but he was attentive in the right proportion, making sure she was not doing things that were unnecessarily taxing while also treating her as completely capable of knowing her own limits. He arranged for Ada to come out to the ranch more often, both for company and for the extra help, and he rode to Dustfield himself every week to bring back any supplies she needed. He also built a cradle. He built it in the barn over the course of several weeks in the evenings, and she did not see it until he carried it into the room they had decided would be the nursery, which was the room adjacent to their bedroom. When she saw it, she stood in the doorway and said nothing for a moment because the quality of the work was extraordinary, carved with care and sanded smooth, the most beautiful piece of furniture in the house. "Cole," she said. "I had time in the evenings," he said. "You made this." "I made it," he confirmed. She looked at him and then at the cradle, and she was absolutely certain in that moment, more certain than she had been of almost any other thing, that this was exactly right. This man and this life and this child coming. The baby came in early November of 1880, on a cold and clear night, and the labor was long but not dangerous, and Dr. Wharton was there throughout, and Cole sat outside the bedroom door for 7 hours and was, according to Augusto who sat with him, completely impossible to talk to for the entire duration. When Wharton opened the door and told him that Eliza was well and the baby was here, Cole went white and then went through the door, and Eliza was in the bed looking tired and extraordinary, and in her arms was a small and very new person who was their son. Cole sat on the edge of the bed and looked at this small person, and then he looked at Eliza, and whatever was on his face was not a thing she could have described if she had tried, because it was too large and too layered and too completely human. "He is well," Cole said. "He is very well," Eliza confirmed. "He is quite indignant about having arrived, but he is well." Cole put out one finger and the baby's hand closed around it with extraordinary purposefulness. "Hello," Cole said very quietly to his son. They named him James Ellard Whitfield, James for Cole's father and Ellard for the original county surveyor whose honest work had preserved the ranch. Eliza thought this was exactly the right kind of name for a boy who would grow up on this land. James Ellard Whitfield was a healthy and vigorous baby who had strong opinions about everything and communicated them at considerable volume. He had his mother's dark hair and his father's gray eyes, and he was loved by everyone on the ranch with an enthusiasm that he seemed to find entirely appropriate. Cole was an exceptional father in the way that men are exceptional fathers when they have both the capacity for tenderness and the discipline to actually show it. He took James out to the barn in the mornings and introduced him to each horse by name. He talked to him seriously about the cattle operation and the range conditions as if the baby were a ranch hand who might have useful input. Eliza watched this from the porch sometimes with a feeling so warm and particular that she could not quite contain it. The Goss affair had been resolved, the ranch was flourishing, the accounts were solid, and Forrester in San Angelo had sent a letter to say that the Whitfield deed was now so well established in the county records that no challenge to it would ever find traction again. In the spring of 1880, one Cole rode into Dustfield alone one Saturday and came back with a package wrapped in brown paper. He handed it to Eliza on the porch while James slept inside. She opened it. It was a book, a collection of poetry that she had mentioned once, months ago, in the context of a different conversation that she had read as a girl and loved. She had not expected him to remember, let alone to find a copy. She looked at him. "I wrote to the bookseller in San Antonio," he said. "It took a while to come." "Cole," she said. "You mentioned it once," he said. "I just wanted you to have it." She stood on the porch with the book in her hands and this man in front of her, and the sound of their son breathing in the room behind her. And she thought that a year and a half ago she had sat in the dust outside a stage depot in this same town with 15 cents and a broken carpetbag, and a name that was not legally hers, and that she had been, in that moment, as thoroughly at the mercy of the world as a person could be. And then this man had walked up to her and asked, without any particular ceremony, whether she was trying to decide something. She crossed the porch and put her arms around him, and he put his arms around her without any surprise, as though he had been expecting exactly this, as though it were the natural conclusion of an action he had taken 6 months ago. "Thank you," she said, her face against his shoulder. "For the book. For all of it," she said. "For everything." He held her and she held him, and the spring morning moved around them, and it was very simple and very complete. Life on the Whitfield ranch had a quality in those years that Eliza thought she would always be grateful for, the quality of ordinary days made remarkable by the rightness of what they contained. The work was real and the land was demanding, and the seasons were occasionally brutal, as West Texas seasons could be. But all of it was good because it was hers, and it was his, and it was theirs together. Augusto and Catalina remained as essential to the operation of the ranch as the land itself, and their children grew alongside little James with the easy proximity of children who have always known each other. Mrs. Pearl Hutchins continued to preside over the general store in Dustfield, and had appointed herself a kind of unofficial chronicler of the Whitfield family's progress, which meant that everything about them was known throughout the county within approximately 48 hours of its occurrence. In the autumn of 1882, Eliza found herself expecting again. She told Cole on the porch in the evening, in almost exactly the same way she had told him the first time, sitting across from him with a piece of news that was large and needed space. He was considerably less shaky about it the second time, though not considerably less moved. He came around the table and kissed her very thoroughly and then sat back down and said, "How are you feeling?" with an immediacy that made her feel looked after in the most specific and personal way. "I feel well," she said, "tired as before, but well." "Then we will take care as before," he said, "and it will be fine." "You sound very certain," she said. "I have decided to be certain," he said. "It seems like the best available option." She smiled at him. "That is remarkably reasonable of you." The second baby came in May of 1883, And this time there was less waiting and less fear because they knew what they were doing and because Dr. Wharton had become, over the years, almost a friend to the family, and because Catalina was there and Ada was there, and Cole had learned, in the intervening years, how to be present without becoming a problem. This baby was a girl, and she arrived with even stronger opinions than her brother had, which was notable. She was small and loud and had a look in her eyes from almost the first day that suggested she had assessed her situation and found it acceptable but intended to renegotiate the terms. They named her Clara Margaret Whitfield. The Margaret was for Cole's first wife, and Eliza had suggested it herself, because she understood by now that Margaret was not a threat or a complication but a person who had been loved and lost and who deserved to be remembered, and that naming this new and roaring small person partly for her was the kind of continuity that felt right rather than painful. Cole said, when she suggested it, "Are you certain?" And she said yes, and he said, "I think she would have liked that," and that was the end of the discussion. Clara Margaret Whitfield did, in fact, proceed to renegotiate every term she encountered for the first several years of her life, and everyone who encountered her agreed that she was going to be a considerable force in the world. James, who was 3 when Clara arrived, regarded his sister with the particular combination of suspicion and fascination that firstborn children often display, and within 3 months had appointed himself her primary protector and unofficial ambassador, which Clara tolerated with occasional graciousness. The ranch grew through the mid-1880s in steady and satisfying ways. The cattle herd expanded, and the bunkhouse was renovated to accommodate 2 additional hands that the operation now required. The main house gained a new room off the east side that became a proper study, with shelves that Cole built for Eliza's books, which had multiplied considerably over the years as she rode away to booksellers in San Antonio and occasionally in Dallas. Dustfield itself was growing too, as the railroad that had been slowly creeping west across Texas finally reached the county in 1884 and brought with it a surge of new settlers and commerce that changed the character of the town considerably. The church was expanded, a proper school was established, and a new hotel went up on the main street that had a dining room with tablecloths. Eliza became, by the mid-1880s, something of a figure in the Dustfield community in ways she had not particularly sought but had grown into naturally. She was on the school board, which she had joined originally because the school needed organizing and she had organizational skills. She helped establish a small lending library in the back room of the general store, with a collection that started with 30 volumes donated from various households and grew over several years to several hundred. She was known as a woman of good sense and direct manner, who would give you an honest opinion if you asked for one, and was worth asking. Cole watched all of this with a quiet and genuine pride that he expressed to her privately rather than publicly, because he was not a public man about his feelings, but he expressed it consistently enough that she never doubted it. "You have become quite formidable," he told her one evening, when she had come home from a particularly contentious school board meeting where she had apparently won a significant argument about the reading curriculum. "I have always been formidable," she said. "You simply did not know it when I arrived with a broken carpetbag." "I suspected it," he said. She looked at him with amusement. "Did you? You asked around about me before you agreed to come work here," he said. "A person who is not formidable would have been too frightened to negotiate even that quietly." She considered this. "That is a generous reading of what was actually desperation," she said. "Desperation that included strategy," he said. "That is formidable." She threw a dishcloth at him, which was the kind of exchange they had become capable of after several years of marriage, the kind that was simultaneously argument and affection, and too layered to be one or the other. By 1885, the Whitfield Ranch was one of the more prosperous operations in the county, not the largest but managed with a precision, and an intelligence that made it consistently profitable through the fluctuations that tormented less well-run operations. Cole was a known man, respected by his neighbors and by the buyers who came through from Fort Worth, and Eliza Whitfield was known as the person who kept the books and the correspondence, and who could tell you to the head how many cattle they were running, and to the dollar how their margins looked. This was not considered unusual by everyone. There were parts of the country where a woman's business intelligence was welcomed, and parts where it was viewed with suspicion, and Dustfield contained some of both types. But on the whole, the community had arrived at an acceptance of Eliza Whitfield as a significant half of a significant partnership, and the people who had murmured about her arrival in 1878 had either changed their opinions or moved on. The afternoon of the summer of 1886 was the kind that carved itself into your memory without asking permission. Cole had ridden out to the southern pasture to check on a section of fence that Augusto said had taken some damage in a recent storm, and Eliza had taken James, now 6, and Clara, now 3, out to the kitchen garden because the beans needed picking and children could be drafted into useful labor if you made it sufficiently interesting. James was being very thorough about the beans. Clara was being very interested in a caterpillar she had found on a fence post and showing no interest whatsoever in beans. Eliza watched her daughter crouched over the caterpillar with complete absorption and thought about the things she had not expected. She had not expected to end up on this particular piece of land. She had not expected to love a man who built cradles in the barn and brought her books from booksellers in San Antonio. She had not expected to have 2 children who were so fully and specifically themselves that watching them was one of the most interesting things she had ever done. She had not expected any of it, and here it all was. Cole came back from the southern pasture in the late afternoon, and she heard his horse and then his boots on the porch, and then his voice asking James about his progress with the beans. And James gave him a detailed accounting that took considerably longer than the information warranted, which Cole listened to with complete apparent interest. She came around the corner of the house, and Cole was crouching down to be at James's level, listening to the bean report, and Clara had transferred herself and the caterpillar from the fence post to her father's boot, and was telling him about the caterpillar with equal detail. Cole somehow was managing to attend to both of them simultaneously, which was something she had observed him become increasingly skilled at over the past 3 years. He looked up and saw her, and the expression on his face when he looked up at her was the same expression it had been on that first evening on the porch when she had said she loved him, specific and settled and sure. "How's the fence?" she asked. "Needs a new post on the south corner," he said. "I'll take Sila's out tomorrow morning." "I'll put it in the log," she said. "I know you will," he said, and there was everything in that, everything of what they had built and how they had built it, in that small and easy exchange. They ate supper on the porch that evening because the heat inside was still considerable, and the porch was better for the cooling air coming off the plains. James told an elaborate story about the beans that bore little relationship to the actual events of the afternoon, but was structurally impressive for a 6-year-old. Clara ate her supper with great seriousness, and then fell asleep upright in her chair in the way that very small children can, one moment awake and opinionated, and the next moment simply done. Cole carried her to her bed with the practiced ease of a father who has done it many times, and Eliza sat on the porch with the evening coming on and the sound of the plains and the satisfaction of everything being, right now, completely all right. He came back out and sat beside her, and the silence was the best kind of silence, the kind that does not need to be filled. "Do you remember the day we met?" she said after a while. "Outside the stage depot," he said. "You were sitting with that bag on your knees and you looked like you were made out of something harder than most people." She was surprised. "I was terrified," she said. "I know," he said. "But you were terrified in a particular way. You looked like a person who knew how to be terrified and keep going anyway." "I did not feel that way," she said. "That's usually how it works," he said. She thought about the woman she had been that day on the steps of the stage depot. 22 years old and nobody, with 15 cents and a broken latch and no name that meant anything. She thought about what that woman would have said if you had told her what the next 8 years would contain. She thought the woman would have been unable to believe it, not because it was too good to be true, but because it was too specific to be imagined. You could not have described Cole Whitfield in the abstract and had her understand what he would come to mean. You had to have been on that wagon in the February afternoon with the cold light slanting across the plains, and you had to have had that first evening of cribbage and the Sunday walks and the letters about the land dispute and the North pasture in November and all of it, every ordinary particular of it, to understand what it added up to. "I have been thinking," she said. "About what?" "About how strange it is that the worst thing that happened to me led me here," she said. "That Thomas Garrett's dishonesty put me on that stagecoach, and that stagecoach put me in front of that stage depot, and you happened to be walking by." "I was not walking by," he said. "I had come into town for supplies, and I was on my way to the store, and I saw you and I stopped." "Why did you stop?" He was quiet for a moment, considering. "Because you looked like someone who needed a different kind of day than the one you were having," he said. "And I thought I might be able to help with that." She looked at him in the evening light. "You have helped with considerably more than one day," she said. "You have helped with considerably more than I offered," he said. "I offered you work and a room. You gave me—" He stopped. "What?" she said softly. "You gave me back myself," he said. "The part of me that was still interested in being alive. That was still interested in the next day and the one after it. I did not know how far I had gotten from that until you started bringing me back." She reached over and took his hand in the way she had taken it in the east pasture on that August evening, and he held it in the way he had held it then, and the night came on around them with its full cargo of stars, the West Texas sky doing its extraordinary thing. "We did well," she said simply. "We did," he agreed. James appeared at the door behind them, only slightly successfully pretending he had not been listening. "Mama, I'm not tired," he announced. "You will be," she said, without turning around. "Give it 10 minutes." He retreated with minimal argument, which was unusual and probably strategic. Cole squeezed her hand. She squeezed back. The ranch in those later years of the 1880s had a fullness to it that was different from its earlier fullness, which had been the fullness of work and survival, and the first careful steps toward something. This was the fullness of a life well established, of a place and a family that had grown into themselves and knew what they were. In the summer of 1887, Augusto's eldest son, Marco, joined the ranch operation as a proper hand, and this struck everyone involved as entirely right and fitting, a second generation beginning its contribution to the same place. Marco was 18 and serious and capable, and Cole treated him with the same respect he gave to any man who did honest work, which Eliza noted approvingly. She had always been aware of the fact that the West Texas they lived in was not kind to everyone equally. She had seen enough of the inequalities that governed the territory, the way that Mexican families like Augusto's navigated a world that alternately needed their labor and denied their standing, the way that the former Comanche lands they lived on had been taken, and how recently that taking had happened. She was not a person who could think about these things without feeling the weight of their injustice, and she was also not a person who was able to think about them without also thinking about what she could actually do within the scope of her real influence. She made sure Marco got the same wage as any other hand. She made sure the school board she served on considered the children of all families in its policies. She used the lending library she had helped establish to make sure books came in Spanish as well as English, because Catalina's younger children were learning to read in both languages and deserved literature in both. These were not grand gestures. They were the ordinary workings of a person who believed that the right thing ought to be done in the available circumstances, and she did them without announcement. Cole saw them as he saw most things about her. He said nothing, which was how she knew he approved completely. The autumn of 1887 brought a development that no one had anticipated, which was that Thomas Garrett turned up in Dustfield. Eliza was in the general store when she saw him. She knew him immediately across the width of the store, despite the years and the beard he had grown, and she went entirely still for a moment in the way that the body goes still when it receives an unexpected shock. He had not seen her yet. He was talking to Mrs. Hutchins at the counter with his hat in his hands, and he had the same quality of performed trustworthiness about him that she remembered, the same smoothness that she had now learned to read for exactly what it was. She finished her purchase with complete composure and walked out of the store and went to find Cole, who was at the feed merchant's across the street. She told him, quietly and without drama, that Thomas Garrett was in the general store. Cole went entirely still in the same way she had gone still, but with a different quality to it. "What do you want to do?" he said, and his voice was even. She thought about this. She thought about it for the length of a breath. "Nothing," she said. "There is nothing to do. He has no claim on me. He has no power over anything in my life. I am Eliza Whitfield, with a legal marriage certificate and a ranch and 2 children and a library I helped establish and a book of poetry that you sent to San Antonio for. He is no one to me." Cole looked at her. "That is the correct position," he said. "Yes," she said. "It is." Thomas Garrett, it turned out, had come to Dustfield looking for work, which the county did not particularly offer him, and he was gone within 3 days. He did not attempt to make contact with Eliza, and she did not seek contact with him, and the whole episode passed like weather, uncomfortable while it was present and forgotten once it was clear. What remained after it, though, was a quiet sense of something completed. She had been afraid for years, not of Thomas himself, but of the feeling that what he had done had diminished her in some permanent way. Seeing him across the width of a general store and feeling nothing but clarity had told her, definitively, that it had not. She went home that evening and helped James with his reading lesson and put Clara to bed and made supper and sat on the porch with Cole in the evening. And she was entirely and specifically herself, in all her particularity and all her strength. And she thought that she would not trade any of it, not a single difficult step, because the path of it had been the path to here, and here was exactly right. In the spring of 1888 she found she was expecting a 3rd child, and she told Cole on the porch in the manner that had become something of a tradition between them, and he looked at her with the expression that she loved, the one that was too large to be contained and too honest to be hidden, and he said, "A 3rd," with a wonder in his voice as though the world kept handing him things he had not thought to ask for. "A 3rd," she confirmed. "Are you well?" "I am very well," she said. He put his arm around her, and she rested against him in the May evening, with the sunflowers on the south wall beginning to come up again for their 9th season, and the sound of James telling Clara something important in the house behind them, and the smell of the ranch and the plains, and the first warmth of the approaching summer. The 3rd baby came in November of 1888, on an unseasonably mild evening that felt like a gift from the weather. This one was another boy, smaller than James had been at birth, but similarly strong-willed in his communicative style. He had Eliza's dark hair and her eyes, which were brown and direct, and Cole held him with the ease of a man who had done this before, but not with the reduced astonishment of a man for whom it had grown ordinary, because it had not grown ordinary, because it was not ordinary. They named him Ellard August Whitfield, August for Augusto, which made Catalina cry and Augusto clear his throat repeatedly and look at a fixed point on the wall, and Eliza thought this was exactly the right choice, and she was very glad she had suggested it. James, now 8, accepted his new brother with a dignified graciousness that he was clearly working hard at. Clara, now 5, appointed herself the baby's primary interpreter and began translating his communications to the household with an authority that no one had granted her, and that was entirely effective. The ranch went on. The seasons went on. Dustfield went on and grew and changed, and in the changing retained certain constants. Among them Mrs. Pearl Hutchins at her counter and Reverend Kane at his pulpit, and the Whitfield Ranch 6 miles north with its sunflowers and its well and its 2 cottonwood trees in the north pasture that were now, by the end of the decade, grown tall enough to give real shade. On a Sunday evening in the autumn of 1889, Cole and Eliza walked out to the north pasture as they sometimes did, the same walk they had taken all those years ago when he had told her about Margaret and the son who would have been named Thomas. The cottonwoods were in their full fall color now, gold and trembling in the evening breeze, each leaf a small, bright thing. Cole stood beside her in front of the trees and put his arm around her, and she leaned against his side, and they looked at the gold leaves and the last light in the west, and the long sweep of the Llano Estacado going on in every direction like a world without end. "I used to come out here to be sad," he said, "and I would come out here and succeed." "And now?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment, his arm around her, his eyes on the 2 tall trees. "Now I come out here and I feel sad and grateful at the same time," he said, "for what was lost and for what was given, and I think that is what it should feel like. I think that is what it means to still be in it." She understood. She looked at the 2 trees that were grown, and she thought about the year she had arrived in Dustfield with nothing. And she thought about Cole standing in front of Margaret's photograph with his hat in his hands. And she thought about how 2 people could begin as strangers in trouble and end up as something as particular and unrepeatable as what they were. He had given her his name because she had none, and because it was the right thing, and he was a man who did the right thing. And she had given him, in return, the thing she had not known she was giving and he had not known he needed, which was a reason to want the next morning and the one after it, which was herself, fully and entirely, which was enough. She took his hand the way she always did, and they stood in the north pasture with the gold leaves coming down around them, and the evening was long and beautiful, and behind them in the house, their 3 children were making the specific and irreplaceable noise of children who are safe and alive and entirely themselves. And that noise came across the autumn air to where Eliza and Cole were standing, and it was the best sound either of them had ever heard. She thought, as she stood there, that she had come to this place as nobody, and that she was now, irrevocably and in every direction, somebody. She was Mrs. Cole Whitfield, and she was the woman who had helped save the ranch's eastern creek boundary, and the woman who had built a library in the back of a general store, and the woman who had planted sunflowers for no reason but that she wanted them. She was the mother of James Ellard and Clara Margaret and small Ellard August, who was at this moment probably asleep in Ada's arms in the kitchen. She was the person who played cribbage on evenings and brought wildflowers in from the pasture in summer. She was the person who had seen a man standing in front of a photograph with his hat in his hands and had understood without being told what that meant, and had backed out of the room quietly, and had come back and knocked. She was all of these things, and she was his, and he was hers, and the sunflowers would come back in the spring as they always did, and the books in the library would be read and returned and read again, and the cattle would move through the seasons as they always had, and James would grow up, and Clara would renegotiate every term she encountered, and Ellard would have his mother's eyes and his father's steadiness, and none of it would be perfect, and all of it would be theirs. "We should go in," Cole said eventually, as the stars were beginning. "Yes," she said, "we should go in." But they stood there another moment in the way of people who are aware they are living inside something worth slowing down for, aware that ordinary evenings on ordinary land are the substance of the thing, the actual material of a life, and that they are not ordinary at all. Then they turned together and walked back across the north pasture toward the lighted windows of the house, hand in hand, the 2 of them, going home.